for caregiving, because each one of these panelists has a different approach to help the caregiver and help the elderly stay connected or stay monitored or help their safety. So there's a whole different bunch of areas here, plus one of our panelists has a brand new product being introduced here at CES, so we're very excited about. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our moderator for this session, Dr. David Lindeman. He's the director of the Center of Aging and Technology. And the Center of Aging and Technology is an initiative of the SCAN Foundation and Public Health Institute. And he also serves as the co-director of the Center of Innovation and Technology in Public Health. And you don't need to hear from me, you need to hear from David. So take it away, David.
Well, Susan makes this very easy, and I'd just like to not only thank you all for going with us this afternoon, but I think you're going to find this extremely worthwhile. We're now at a point where, as we get to the last few sessions of the day, it'll be intriguing to hear people pushing some of the thoughts and ideas excuse me, we've heard throughout the last few sessions. And again, Susan makes it very easy. She's already given you an introduction that we're hearing 5 very different technologies, all that range from folks who've been really working at this in the field for a period of time with their current company and product, to others who are launching here today. And I think this is going to be very worthwhile to hear the diversity, ranging from medication management to overviews of individuals to, as you heard, a robot. But we have a great deal of experience on the panel. I'm going to keep the introduction short so you can hear from them about their work. We're going to get through so that ideally, even with an extra panelist, we'll have time for questions from the audience. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Charlie Hillman. And Charlie has been an honored person here at this conference for a number of years, and he always presents some very exciting perspectives, not only related to GrandCare, but because he's been an entrepreneur over the number of years, he speaks to a very broad perspective in this area. He's developed a number of programs historically that help older adults with maintaining better health, greater security, and less social isolation. And with his background, he's been a champion for the Center for Aging Services Technology in Washington, associated with ASA. And I'd like to turn the panel over to Charlie.
Well, thank you. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and all of those people watching on YouTube. Unless, of course, you have an iPad, then, of course, no. My name is Charlie Hillman. I'm from GrandCare Systems in West Bend, Wisconsin, and it's a pleasure to be here today. Intelligent systems for caregivers. I love this topic because it is very clear that the caregiver, whether familial or professional, needs much more intelligent systems to promote greater efficiencies and ease the tremendous burden that is caregiving. But as we parse this topic, we know that we are talking about the intelligence of 2 different players here, and we further realize that we are talking about 2 very different kinds of intelligence. 2 different kinds of intelligence that are often at odds with one another. It's not exactly a feud, you know, it's not the Hatfields versus the McCoys or PC versus Mac, less filling versus taste great, Packers versus Bears, but instead it's silicon intelligence versus carbon-based intelligence. And the important part, of course, there is bridging the intelligence gap. Now, for many years, programmers, and I've been a programmer for much of my life, have hoped and dreamt that they could change humans so that they would think more like computers, right? But I can assure you that that's probably not going to happen to anyone, you know, over the age of 40. Although I hope you all heard Gary Small speak this morning, because after hearing him talk, I'm starting to worry about my grandchildren, that someday I'll come to the door and knock on it and I'll say, "Madison, let me in," and she'll say, "I can't do that, Grandpa." So we think that the iPad may be changing our grandchildren, but so I thought I'd take a couple minutes today, my few minutes, and muse about this intelligence divide. But first, a word from our sponsor. GrandCare Systems is a fully featured system aimed at providing independence of seniors and, of course, peace of mind for their caregivers. We've been called the Swiss Army knife of systems. We prefer the term holistic, but we attempt to address a number of different challenges. First, note what's in the middle of this diagram. We have been designed from the ground up specifically to address care in the private home. We feel this is where care should be, and we think most folks agree. We are convinced that the GI generation will accept this, the silent generation will enjoy it, but the boomers will demand it. So we think this is the way that this has to go. And there are really 4 areas to provide that total solution. First, top left, home automation. This is the oldest of the technologies, providing security, turning on the porch lights at dusk, keeping an eye on the temperature, making sure that the stove hasn't been left on, perhaps light the way to the bathroom when someone gets up at night. Cognitive assistant, of course, to mitigate falls. The big money item, of course, is in the top right. That's wellness monitoring. We provide physiological monitoring, medication compliance, self-assessment, and of course, the most important part, and that's encouragement to maintain chronic conditions. I don't know if anyone was at the digital health thing yesterday, but I really like the speaker from the Cleveland Clinic. One of the things he noted was that telehealth actually, in terms of congestive heart failure patients, actually increased the number of clinical visits. And at first that sounds counterintuitive, but then he explained that 1 emergency room visit equals 15 clinical visits, so we can see that that's a really important thing. And it's really a scary thought to me that if the boomers do not embrace this sort of technology to promote their own self-wellness, we as the boomers will bankrupt this country with our healthcare needs. And I hope the boomers in this room take that very seriously, because I really worry if we do not get going here. Activity monitoring, the system can assure that the caregiver that this is really a peace of mind thing, that mom got up in the morning, call them if dad walks out of the door in the middle of the night, remind a senior to drink more water if the refrigerator hasn't been opened up, things like that. And finally, the social connectivity part. Pictures, emails, websites, brain exercises, a very easy Skype interface. The same thing that all the youngsters are used to doing, of course, with an age-appropriate interface. Now, this is not only fun, reduces isolation and loneliness, but it's actually critical to the system. For without a place to speak to the person who's being cared for, to the senior, you can't realize the benefits in the other 3 parts of this system. If you want to encourage wellness, you have to have a way to communicate with someone. So that's the end of the commercial. Suffice it to say that we think we are smarter than the average bear. So let's get back to the musings, because this is the part I like the most. Now, carbon-based intelligence has a big advantage over silicon-based intelligence. Why? Because carbon-based got to define what intelligence means. And human intelligence has evolved over many millions of years, while silicon intelligence has just been over the last couple decades. And when you think about that, wow, that's actually kind of a scary thought to see how fast that has happened. So let's start. Computational intelligence. At one time, abilities in chess were considered a sign of genius, right? Unfortunately, inversely proportional to the propensity to procreate. I'll let that one sink in. But nonetheless, that's what we used to think. Why? Because people considered chess as a game of infinite possibilities, and to most people it seemed that way. Then came Deep Blue and Garry Kasparov. And when a computer finally beat a human in chess, we realized that really chess is just as deterministic, is no more deterministic or the same amount of determinism as is tic-tac-toe, really. All it takes is CPU cycles. So computational intelligence, I think we're going to hand that over to the silicon side of the house. Memory. Experts say that within the next 10 years, there will be single systems with as much memory as the human brain, certainly in terms of disk capacity. And certainly this is an area that we really must concentrate on, because memory is certainly a problem with aging. But the important thing is when we move into something called associative intelligence. In other words, how to access that memory in a sensible way. Carbon-based units have a tremendous advantage here. For example, say you are researching